Do you know the harrowing story of George Stinney Jr., the youngest person executed in the United States in the 20th century? Have you ever wondered how a 14-year-old boy could be convicted and put to death in a matter of just 80 days? The execution of George Stinney Jr. is one of the most controversial and tragic events in American legal history, raising profound questions about justice, race, and the legal system in the Jim Crow South. Despite his conviction being vacated decades later, the case continues to haunt and intrigue. Let's jump into the details of George Stinney Jr.'s trial, the circumstances of his execution, and the eventual exoneration that came too late. Stay with us and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. George Junius Stinney Jr. was an African-American boy who, at the age of 14, was convicted and executed in a trial later deemed unfair. He was accused of murdering two young white girls, Betty June Binnicker, age 11, and Mary Emma Thames, age 8, in March 1944 in Alkaloo, South Carolina. Despite his youth, Stinney was convicted, sentenced to death, and executed by electric chair in June 1944. Making him the youngest American with a confirmed birth date to be sentenced to death and executed in the 20th century. In 2004, a re-examination of Stinney's case was initiated by several individuals in the Northeastern University School of Law. In 2014, 70 years after his execution, a South Carolina court vacated Stinney's murder conviction, ruling that he had not received a fair trial and was wrongfully executed. In 1944, George lived in a small home with a chicken coop in Alkaloo, South Carolina, with his father, George Junius Stinney Sr., mother Amy Brown Stinney, brother Charles Stinney, and sisters Catherine Stinney and Amy Stinney Ruffner. Stinney's father worked at the town sawmill, and the family resided in company housing. Alkaloo was a small working-class mill town with segregated white and black neighborhoods separated by railroad tracks, typical of small southern towns of the era, where schools and churches were also segregated. On March 23, 1944, the bodies of Betty June Binnicker and Mary Emma Thames were found in a ditch on the African-American side of Alkaloo after failing to return home the previous night. Stinney's father had assisted in the search. The girls had been beaten with a blunt weapon, reported to be a piece of metal or a railroad spike, resulting in severe blunt force trauma that penetrated their skulls. According to the medical examiner, these wounds were inflicted by a blunt instrument with a round head, about the size of a hammer. There was no evidence of sexual assault on the younger girl, though the older girl's genitalia were slightly bruised. The girls were last seen riding their bicycles looking for flowers. As they passed the Stiney's property, they asked Stinney and his sister, Amy, if they knew where to find maypops, a local name for passion flowers. According to Amy, she was with Stinney at the time the police later determined the murders occurred. On March 24, 1944, George Stinney and his older brother John were arrested on suspicion of murdering the girls. John was released, but George was held in custody and not allowed to see his parents until after his trial and conviction. According to a handwritten statement by H.S. Newman, a Clarendon County deputy, "I arrested a boy by the name of George Stinney. He then made a confession and told me where to find a piece of iron about 15 inches long, which he said he put in a ditch about 6 feet from the bicycle." In 1995, Stinney's 7th grade teacher, Bowie L. Hamilton, a black man, spoke about George in an interview with the Sumter item. Hamilton stated, "I remember the day he killed those children. He got into a fight with a girl at school who was his neighbor. In those days, you didn't have to worry about children carrying guns and knives to school. But George carried a little knife and scratched this child with it. I took him outside for a walk, talked to him, and he apologized to the child." Stinney's sister, Amy Ruffner, denied these allegations and contacted Hamilton after the interview was published. Ame said, "I asked him why he would say something like that. He told me someone paid him to say it." Hamilton died shortly after his interview was published. Following Stinney's arrest, his father was fired from his job at the local sawmill, and the family had to vacate their company housing immediately due to fears for their safety. Stinney's parents did not see him again before the trial. He had no support during his 81-day confinement and trial, being detained at a jail in Columbia, 50 miles from Alkaloo, to avoid the risk of lynching. Stinney was questioned alone, without his parents or an attorney present. Although the Sixth Amendment guarantees legal counsel, this was not routinely observed until the 1963 Supreme Court ruling in Gideon v. Wainwright explicitly required representation throughout criminal proceedings. The entire proceeding against George Stinney, including jury selection, took place on April 24, 1944. Stinney's court-appointed counsel was Charles Plowden, a tax commissioner campaigning for local office. Plowden did not challenge the 3 police officers who testified that Stinney confessed to the 2 murders, nor did he attempt to defend Stinney. He also did not challenge the prosecution's presentation of 2 differing versions of Stinney's verbal confession. In one version, Stinney was attacked by the girls after he tried to help one who had fallen in the ditch, and he killed them in self-defense. In the other version, he had followed the girls, first attacking Mary Emma and then Betty June. There is no written record of Stinney's confession apart from Deputy Newman's statement. At trial, aside from the testimony of the 3 police officers, prosecutors called 3 witnesses: Reverend Francis Batson, who discovered the bodies of the 2 girls, and the 2 doctors who performed the post-mortem examinations. The court allowed discussion of the possibility of rape due to bruising on Binneker's genitalia. Stinney's counsel did not call any witnesses, did not cross-examine witnesses, and offered little to no defense. The trial presentation lasted only 2.5 hours. More than 1,000 white Americans crowded the courtroom, but no black Americans were allowed. As was typical at the time, Stinney was tried before an all-white jury. After deliberating for less than 10 minutes, the jury found Stinney guilty of murder. Judge Philip H. Stoll sentenced Stinney to death by electrocution. Stinney's family, churches, and the NAACP appealed to Governor Olin D. Johnston for clemency, given the age of the boy. Most of the pleas for clemency came from white women living in South Carolina. Some pleas from whites came with affirmations of white supremacy, but discomfort at the prospect of someone so young being executed. Others urged the governor to let the execution proceed, which he did. He visited George Stinney in the death house 2 days before his execution on June 14th. Johnston wrote a response to one appeal for clemency, stating, "I have just talked with the officer who made the arrest in this case. It may be interesting for you to know that Stinney killed the smaller girl to rape the larger one. Then he killed the larger girl and raped her dead body. 20 minutes later, he returned and attempted to rape her again, but her body was too cold. All of this he admitted himself. It was reported that these were merely rumors, and Johnston's claims were not corroborated by the girls' autopsies. Between the time of Stinney's arrest and his execution, his parents were allowed to see him once after the trial, when he was held in the Columbia Penitentiary. Under the threat of lynching, they were not allowed to see him any other time. Stinney was executed on Friday, June 16, 1944, at 7:30 a.m. Because he was too small for the electric chair, a Bible was used as a booster seat. He was then restrained by his arms, legs, and body to the chair. When asked if he had any last words, Stinney shook his head and said, "No, sir." The executioner pulled a strap from the chair and placed it over Stinney's mouth, causing him to break into tears, and then placed a face mask over his face, which did not fit properly. When the lethal electricity was applied, the mask slipped off, revealing tears streaming down Stinney's face. This perception was later contested by Terry Evans, the niece of Mary Emma Thames's mother, Lula May. Terry's uncle, Clyde Barnes, witnessed the execution and told Evans's father what he saw, which was then relayed to her years later. Her father stated, "He said it was just a rumor that the hood had slipped and they did not put a stack of books under him." Stinney was buried in an unmarked grave at the Calvary Baptist Church Cemetery in Lee County, South Carolina. On December 16, 2014, instead of approving a new trial, Circuit Court Judge Carmen Mullen vacated Stinney's conviction. She ruled that he had not received a fair trial as he was not effectively defended and his Sixth Amendment rights had been violated. This ruling used the rare legal remedy of coram nobis. Judge Mullen determined that Stinney's confession was likely coerced and thus inadmissible. She also found that the execution of a 14-year-old constituted cruel and unusual punishment, and that his attorney had failed to call exculpating witnesses or to preserve his right of appeal. While confining her judgment to the prosecution process, Mullen noted that Stinney may well have committed this crime. She wrote, "No one can justify a 14-year-old child charged, tried, convicted, and executed in some 80 days," concluding, "In essence, not much was done for this child when his life lay in the balance." While Stinney's family and civil rights advocates celebrated the overturning of his conviction, relatives of Betty Binnicker and Mary Thames expressed disappointment. They acknowledged the controversy of executing a 14-year-old, but never doubted Stinney's guilt. Binnicker's niece claimed her family had extensively researched the case, arguing that people who just read these articles in the newspaper don't know the truth. She alleged that a police officer who arrested Stinney had told her in the early 1990s, "Don't you ever believe that boy didn't kill your aunt?" These family members also noted that claims of a deathbed confession by another individual had never been substantiated. Another niece of Binnicker, while convinced of Stinney's guilt, agreed he did not receive a fair trial and should not have been executed, expressing sympathy for Stinney and his family and hoping they would find peace. A childhood acquaintance of Binnicker stated, "I'm sorry that they electrocuted him. I wish they had just sent him to prison." Since Stinney's exoneration, speculation has arisen around George Washington Burke Jr., 1917-1947, the son of a wealthy white businessman, as a possible suspect for the murders. Burke Jr. died in 1947, 2 to 3 years after the murders, at age 29. Stinney's mother had briefly worked for the Burke family. Stinney's sister recalled their mother saying that Burke Sr. had made advances toward her, leading their father to tell her not to return to work there. Stinney's sister claimed the Burke boys had framed Stinney because their mother didn't want to give it up. Burke Sr. was involved in the initial search for the girls and owned the territory where their bodies were found. He was also the foreman of the grand jury that indicted Stinney, accused of steering the blame onto Stinney. Two elderly women in Alcolu recalled that Burke Jr. was known for womanizing and committing theft without repercussions. According to Sonia Edie Williamson, a white Alcolu resident investigating the case, who became close to Stinney's sisters, Wayne Burke, George Burke Jr.'s son, said his grandmother told him that his father had picked up the girls in his lumber truck on the day of their murders. In 2017, Wayne Burke denied saying this and maintained his belief in Stinney's guilt. Stinney's sister recalled seeing a lumber truck after the girls asked about maypop flowers. Lawyers for the Stinney family mentioned rumors of a deathbed confession to the murders by a member of a prominent white family, though this has never been proven. George Stinney's case has been frequently referred to in debate over the use of the death penalty in the United States, especially in arguments against the death penalty, due to common belief that Stinney was innocent and wrongfully executed. In January 2022, South Carolina State Representative Caesar McKnight introduced a bill named after Stinney, titled the George Stinney Fund, which would make the state of South Carolina pay $10 million to the families of the wrongfully executed if their conviction is posthumously overturned. Moreover, David Stout based his first novel, Carolina Skeletons, 1988, on the tragic case of George Stinney Jr. The novel garnered critical acclaim and earned Stout the 1989 Edgar Award for Best First Novel, Edgar Allan Poe Award. In Carolina Skeletons, Stout suggests that Stinney, whom he renames Linus Bragg, was innocent of the crimes for which he was executed. The plot revolves around a fictitious brother of Stinney Bragg, who uncovers the truth about the case decades later. This gripping narrative was adapted into a 1991 television movie of the same name, directed by John Erman. Kenny Blank portrayed Stinney Bragg, while Lou Gossett Jr. played his younger brother James. The case of George Stinney Jr. has inspired several other works of literature and media. Albert French's 1993 novel Billy draws inspiration from Stinney's story, delving into themes of racial injustice and the flawed legal system. Similarly, Stephen King's 1996 novel The Green Mile loosely bases its plot on Stinney's story, with the character John Coffey bearing resemblances to Stinney. In February 2014, Pleroma Studios announced another film about the Stinney case, titled 83 Days. Written and produced by Ray Brown, with Charles Burnett initially slated to direct, the film aimed to shed light on the injustice faced by Stinney. The project was eventually released in 2018, directed by Andrew Paul Howell. This film sought to bring Stinney's story to a broader audience, highlighting the miscarriage of justice that led to his execution. The arts have continued to explore and reflect on Stinney's story. In 2015, Francis Pollock, a recent graduate of the Peabody Institute, wrote an opera titled Stinney, An American Execution. This opera premiered to a full house at 2640 Space in Baltimore, Maryland, and several of Stinney's cousins attended the opening night. The opera was later produced by Opera Grand Rapids in 2022, marking its world premiere at the Wage Theater. This production further underscored the ongoing relevance and emotional impact of Stinney's story. Karen Parsons' novel, How High the Moon, features a subplot where a friend of the main character is framed for murdering two white girls, drawing a parallel to George Stinney's case. This subplot serves as a poignant reminder of the systemic racial biases that permeated the American legal system during Stinney's time and continue to resonate today. Jericho Brown's 2021 poem, Inaugural, makes a poignant reference to Stinney's execution, weaving his tragic fate into the broader tapestry of racial injustice in America. This poetic tribute adds another layer of artistic reflection on Stinney's life and the broader implications of his story. Nia DaCosta's 2021 film, Candyman, features George Stinney in a cameo as one of the souls trapped in the Candyman hive. In his Candyman form, Stinney rides a bicycle with his hand in a hook, symbolizing his unjust execution and the lingering ghost of racial injustice. Stinney was also featured in DaCosta's 2020 promotional short film of the same name, where his death and resurrection were depicted using shadow puppetry. These artistic choices serve to keep Stinney's memory alive and draw attention to the historical injustices faced by African Americans. Filmmaker Jamison Stallsworth released a short film titled The Story of George Stinney in 2017. This film provides a poignant recounting of Stinney's life and the circumstances that led to his execution. Through visual storytelling, the film aims to educate viewers about the deep-seated racial prejudices and legal failures that culminated in Stinney's tragic fate. George Stinney's case is also referenced in Chain Gang All-Stars, a novel by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. The novel cites Stinney as the youngest person ever executed by the United States. However, it incorrectly states that George Stinney was exonerated 70 years after his execution, instead of correctly noting that his conviction was vacated. This inaccuracy notwithstanding, the inclusion of Stinney's story in the novel underscores the lasting impact of his case on contemporary discussions of justice and racial inequality. The execution of George Stinney Jr. remains a powerful symbol of racial injustice and the failings of the American legal system. That's all for this video. We hope you have enjoyed this video a lot. What are your thoughts on the exoneration that came decades too late? Do you believe justice was truly served? Let us know in the comments section. Make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that bell icon for more interesting videos like this. Thank you for watching our video.